Henry Lucas was born on the 23rd of August 1936 in a one-room log cabin in Blacksburg, Virginia. His mother, Nellie Viola Lucas, was a member of the Chippewa tribe and an alcoholic who had 7 children, of which Henry and another son were supposedly by Anderson Luca. Anderson was a double amputee who lost his legs in a freight train accident and thereafter was nicknamed No Legs. "My daddy didn't do anything," Lucas later said. "He just sold pencils." However, as Lucas's mother was a prostitute, Anderson Lucas has been characterized as her pimp. Nellie would sometimes force her sons and husband to watch her having sex with her clients. Lucas said. When Lucas was aged 8, he was beaten by his mother around the head with a wooden plank, which caused him to spend 3 days in a coma. He developed an infection in his left eye, and at the age of 10, after one of his brothers struck him with a knife. His mother ignored the injury for several days until the teacher swiped him across the eye with a steel-tipped ruler, and the eyeball burst and it had to be surgically removed. It was replaced with a glass prosthetic. Both of these traumas to Lucas's head have led examining medical experts to conclude that these caused brain damage. Later evidence with CT scans showing small abnormalities in the frontal lobes, temporal lobes, and in the parts of the brain that are related to emotional control. While other medical examiners have concluded problems with his corpus callosum played a role in his aberrant behaviour and personality. Nellie would also make him cross-dress in public, purportedly so she could later pimp him out to both men and women. Eventually, Lucas's school teachers complained about his cross-dressing and a court order put an end to it. Despite this, Nellie continued to abuse and torment Lucas. She shot and killed a mule given to him by his uncle and proceeded to beat him because she had to pay to have the animal carcass removed. Lucas was frequently bullied as a child and later cited the mass rejection by his peers as a cause for his misanthropy. Commenting on his childhood, Lucas stated, his father died of pneumonia after spending the night outside in the cold. While in the 6th grade, Lucas dropped out of school and ran away from home, drifting around Virginia. As an adolescent, he began an incestuous relationship with his half-brother and started engaging in bestiality, capturing small animals and performing sexual acts on them before killing them. He claimed to have committed his first homicide at the age of 14 when he strangled 17-year-old Laura Evelyn Bernsley. Bernsley disappeared from a bus stop in Lynchburg, Virginia in March 1951. Lucas confessed to a murder on the 15th of February 1984. According to Lucas, he picked her up near Lynchburg, and after she refused his sexual advances and resisted an unsuccessful rape attempt, he killed her and buried her body in a secluded wooden area near Harrisburg, Virginia. Lucas said. As with most of his confessions, Lucas later recanted this claim. Bernsley has never been found. In late 1959, Lucas travelled to Tecumseh, Michigan, to live with his half-sister Opal Retta Jennings. Around this time, he was engaged to marry a pen pal, Stella Curtis, with whom he had corresponded while incarcerated. When Lucas's mother, then 71, visited him for Christmas, she disapproved of her son's fiancée and insisted that he move back to Blacksburg to take care of her as she grew older. He refused, and they argued repeatedly. These arguments escalated until the 11th of January 1960, when she struck him over the head with a broom, at which point he stabbed her in the neck. Lucas remembered later elaborating that he slapped her Lucas then fled. When Opal returned to the home, she discovered their mother was still alive on the bedroom floor in a pool of her own blood. Opal called an ambulance, but it arrived too late. The official police report stated that Lucas's mother died of a heart attack precipitated by the assault. Lucas was arrested in Ohio on the outstanding Michigan warrant. He claimed to have killed his mother in self-defense and said, but his claim was rejected and he was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to up to 40 years imprisonment in Jackson State Penitentiary in Southern. He then attempted suicide several times by slashing his wrists and stomach with a razor. He was transferred to the Iowa State Hospital, Michigan, where he was subjected to electric shock therapy, behavior therapy, and heavy doses of antidepressants. He spent 4 years in Iowa State Hospital before returning to prison in 1966, where a social worker met Lucas whilst he was incarcerated and described him as a very inadequate individual with feelings of insecurity and inferiority. After serving 10 years in prison, he was released on the 3rd of June 1970 due to prison overcrowding. In December 1971, he was charged and sentenced to 4 to 5 years in prison for attempting to abduct a 15-year-old girl at gunpoint. He was also in violation of his probation by having a handgun in his possession. While serving his sentence for the crime, he established a relationship with a family friend and the widow of cousin Betty Crawford, who had written to him. After being released from prison in August 1975, he moved to Port Deposit, Maryland, where he married Crawford and moved in with her and her 2 daughters in Pennsylvania on the 5th of December 1975 and began working at a mushroom farm. Their marriage ended in 1975 when Betty accused Lucas of molesting her daughters. Lucas relocated to Jacksonville, Florida in 1976. At a soup kitchen, he befriended Otis Elwood Toole. Otis Toole was born and raised in Jacksonville, Florida. His father was an alcoholic who abandoned him, and his abusive mother would dress him in girls' clothing and call him Susan. He was sexually abused as a child by many close relatives and acquaintances, including his older sister and next-door neighbour. He also claimed to have been physically beaten by his brothers. He stated that his maternal grandmother was a Satanist who exposed him to various satanic practices and rituals, including grave robbing. He claimed this abuse began when he revealed his homosexuality to his family. He was often classified as having a mild intellectual disability with an IQ of 75. He also had epilepsy, which resulted in frequent grand mal seizures. Throughout his childhood, he frequently ran away from home and often slept in abandoned houses. He was a serial arsonist from a young age and was sexually aroused by fire. In the documentary Death Diploma, Toole stated that he was forced to have sex with a friend of his father's when he was just 5 years old. He felt he knew that he was gay when he was 10 years old, and that he had a sexual relationship with a neighbourhood boy when he was 12. Toole dropped out of school in the 9th grade and began visiting gay bars. He also stated that he'd been a prostitute as a teenager and that he became obsessed with gay pornography at some point. He stated that he committed his first murder at the age of 14 after being propositioned for sex by a travelling salesman. He ran over the salesman with his own car. He was first arrested at the age of 17 in August 1965 for loitering. Much of the information about his activities between 1966 and 1973 is unclear, but authorities believe that he began drifting around southwestern United States and that he supported himself by prostitution or panhandling. While living in Nebraska, he was one of the prime suspects in the 1974 murder of 24-year-old Patricia Webb. Shortly after, he left Nebraska and briefly settled in Boulder, Colorado. 1 month later, he became a prime suspect in the homicide of 31-year-old Ellen Holman, who was murdered on the 14th of October 1974. With many accusations being made against him, he left Boulder and headed back to Jacksonville. In early 1975, he returned to Jacksonville after drifting and hitchhiking through the American South. On the 14th of January 1976, he married a woman 25 years older than him. However, she left him after 3 days after discovering his homosexuality. He later said during an interview that his marriage was a tactic meant to conceal his true sexuality. In 1978, Lucas moved in with Toole and Toole's mother in Springfield, Florida, and became close to Toole's niece, 11-year-old Frida Lorraine Becky Powell, who had a mild intellectual disability and had escaped from a juvenile detention center. A period of stability followed, with Lucas and Toole working together in a roofing company between 1979 and 1981. According to Lucas, during this time they engaged in a multi-state killing spree in which they targeted hitchhikers, sex workers and migrants. He also claimed that Toole enjoyed crucifying their victims, then barbecuing and eating them. After their arrest, they were caught discussing cannibalism over a prison phone. Toole asked Lucas, Powell would also occasionally travel with the men and may have helped Lucas and Toole lure potential victims. When interviewed about his crime spree, Lucas stated, On the 4th of January 1982, Toole barricaded 65-year-old George Sonnenberg in a boarding house where he was living in Jacksonville and set the house on fire. Sonnenberg died a week later due to the injuries that he had sustained in the fire. In April 1983, Toole was arrested for an unrelated arson incident in Jacksonville. Toole confessed to the crime and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Toole signed a confession stating that he and Sonnenberg had begun a sexual relationship and, after the two had an argument, Toole set Sonnenberg's home on fire. 2 months later, in June, Lucas was arrested for unlawful possession of a firearm. It was then that Lucas began boasting about the murderous rampage orchestrated by the two. At first, Toole denied involvement, but later began backing up Lucas's confessions. Lucas also backed Toole's confession to the murder of Adam Walsh. Lucas became widely regarded as a compliant interviewee who was used by police to clear up unsolved murders that he had not been involved in, aided by Toole giving false statements in collaboration. During Toole's trial for murdering George Sonnenberg, Toole claimed that he did not light the home on fire and only signed the confession so that he would be extradited back to Jacksonville. On the 28th of April 1984, a jury found Toole guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced him to death. Later that year, Toole was found guilty of the February 1983 strangulation murder of a 19-year-old Tallahassee, Florida woman and received a second death sentence. On appeal, however, both sentences were later commuted to life in prison. After his incarceration, Toole pleaded guilty to 4 more Jacksonville murders in 1991 and received 4 more life sentences. The murders of which Toole was ultimately convicted of were those of John McDaniel, Geraldine Peoples, Brenda Burton, Ruby McCary, George Sonnenberg, and Ada Johnson, all of whom were killed in Florida between 1980 and 1983. On the 21st of October 1983, whilst he was imprisoned for 2 unrelated murders, Toole confessed to the 1981 murder of 6-year-old Adam Walsh. A few weeks after Toole made the confession, however, police officers who were investigating the case announced that they had lost Toole's impounded car and machete. John Walsh, Adam's father, continued to believe that Toole was guilty. On the 16th of December 2008, 27 years after the murder, Hollywood, Florida police announced Toole was the murderer and that the Adam Walsh case was closed. The police didn't reveal any new physical evidence and pointed out that they still had no DNA evidence. Toole claimed that he picked up Walsh in a Sears Mall parking lot. Toole stated that Walsh came willingly because he offered Walsh candy and toys. Walsh soon wanted to go home and began to cry. Toole said that he'd punched Walsh in the face. Walsh then started to cry again, and according to Toole, he began to wallop Walsh, knocking him out. Toole eventually pulled over in a rural area and decapitated Walsh with a machete. He drove around with Walsh's head for several days, forgot about it, and after he rediscovered it, he tossed it into a nearby canal. Police officers inexplicably lost Toole's impounded car and its blood-stained carpeting, hindering their ability to proceed with the investigation into Adam Walsh's murder. In 1984, Toole confessed to 2 unsolved Northwest Florida slayings, including one of the I-10 murders. During an interview, he admitted to killing 18-year-old David Scheller, a hitchhiker who he picked up east of Pensacola. Scheller's body, bearing 5 gunshot wounds in the left side of his head, was found on the 6th of February 1980, approximately 125 feet off I-10's eastbound lane, 5 miles east of Chipley. The second confession involved the death of 20-year-old Ada Johnson. Toole confessed that he had shot her in the head on a road outside Fort Walton Beach after kidnapping her at gunpoint at a Tallahassee nightclub. Psychiatrist Dr. Urbia Dr. Sanchez testified at Toole's 1984 Florida Supreme Court appeal that he was extremely impulsive and exhibited antisocial behavior as a result of a personality disorder and was a pyromaniac. The court found sufficient evidence that Toole would be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. Hollywood, Florida Police Chief Chadwick Wagner said that Toole had been a prime suspect all along, but that he went on to admit that although Toole's case was weak, he could have been charged during the original investigation of it. Wagner acknowledged the fact that many mistakes were made by the department and apologized to the Walsh family on its behalf. Wagner also acknowledged the fact that the lack of new evidence and the inability of Toole to defend himself could provide room for skeptics to doubt Toole's guilt, saying, "If you're looking for the magic wand, that one piece of evidence, it's not there." However, after the police re-examined previously uncorrelated evidence, they and the Walsh family were both satisfied with the new report and the existing evidence which only points to Otis Toole. On the 20th of January 1982, Lucas convinced Powell to run away with him to avoid child welfare authorities. They lived as nomads, eventually travelling to California, where an employer's wife asked them to work for her infirm mother, 82-year-old Katie Pearl Rich. 3 weeks later, Rich went missing, as were Lucas and Powell. Her relatives admonished them for failing to do their jobs, as well as writing checks on Rich's bank account. While hitchhiking, Lucas and Powell were picked up by the minister of a Pentecostal religious commune called the House of Prayer, located in Stoneburg, Texas. Believing that Lucas and then 15-year-old Powell were a married couple, the minister found Lucas a job as a roofer, while allowing the couple to stay in a small apartment on the commune where they attended church services. However, Powell became argumentative and homesick for Florida. Lucas explained her absence by mentioning she had left at a truck stop in Bowie, Texas. On the 10th of June 1983, Lucas was arrested on charges of unlawful possession of a firearm by Texas Ranger Phil Ryan, Whilst in jail, Lucas wrote a letter to the sheriff. He later confessed to the murders of Powell and Rich. He claimed that he had lured Powell into an isolated field in Denton, Texas on the 23rd of August 1982, stabbed her in the chest, engaged in necrophilia with her corpse, before he dismembered and decapitated her and scattered her body to pieces. In Ringgold, Texas on the 16th of September 1982, he reportedly lured Rich to join him in a search for Becky on a camping ground. He then stabbed her in the chest, killing her, then carved an inverted cross on her chest, and also committed necrophilia with her, before stuffing her body into a drainage pipe. Lucas led police to their purported remains. However, forensic evidence alone was inconclusive, and the coroner was unable to positively identify either corpse. Lucas's participation in the investigation would serve to boost his credibility in later confessions to other crimes. Lucas later denied involvement, but the consensus was that he did murder Powell and Rich. In November 1983, he was transferred to jail in Williamson County, Texas. He reported that he attempted suicide after receiving rough treatment by the inmates. He claimed that police stripped him naked, denied him cigarettes and bedding, held him in a cold cell, mutilated his genitalia, and prevented him from contacting an attorney. After 4 days in jail, Lucas pleaded guilty to the 2 murders of Powell and Rich. In court, then also claimed to have committed over 100 additional murders. In interviews with law enforcement personnel, Lucas confessed to numerous additional unsolved killings. It was thought that there was positive corroboration with Lucas's confessions in 28 unsolved murders, so the Lucas Task Force was established by James B. Adams, the director of the Texas Department of Public Safety. The task force officially cleared hundreds of previously unsolved homicides as a result of Lucas's confessions. Lucas received preferential treatment that was extremely lax for someone supposedly thought to be a mass murderer. He was frequently taken to restaurants and cafes, rarely handcuffed, allowed to wander police stations and jails, and even knew codes for security doors. Later attempts at determining Lucas's involvement in his confessed crimes were complicated when it was discovered that he'd been given access to information in the files of cases he was confessing to. There were suggestions that the interview tapes showed that Lucas would read the reactions of those interviewing him and alter what he was saying, thereby making his confessions more consistent with facts known to law enforcement. Journalist Hugh Ainsworth and others investigated the veracity of Lucas's claims for articles that appeared in the Dallas Times Herald. They calculated that Lucas would have had to use his 13-year-old Ford station wagon to cover 11,000 miles in 1 month to have committed the crimes police attributed to him. After the story appeared in April 1985 and revealed the flawed methods of the task force, law enforcement opinion began to turn against their claims that the crimes had been solved. The bulk of the Lucas report was devoted to the detailed timeline of Lucas's claimed murders. The report compared his claims to reliable, verifiable sources for his whereabouts. The results often contradicted his confessions, thus casting doubt on his participation in most of the crimes he had confessed to. Texas Attorney General Jim Mattox wrote that Lucas's case damaged the reputation of the Texas Ranger Division, caused a re-evaluation in police techniques, and created greater awareness of the possibility of false confessions. Investigators didn't consider that the apparently trivial comforts such as steak dinners, milkshakes, and access to television in return for confessions to crimes of extreme seriousness might encourage prisoners such as Lucas, who had little to lose, to make false confessions. Investigators also let Lucas see the case files so that he could refresh his memory, making it easy to seemingly demonstrate knowledge of facts that only the perpetrator would know. The police also didn't record their interviews, making it impossible to know for sure how much information interviewers accidentally gave Lucas unprompted. Lucas was ultimately convicted of 11 homicides, including those of his mother along with Powell and Rich. He had been sentenced to death for one then unidentified woman dubbed as Orange Socks, whose body was found in Williamson County on Halloween 1979, despite a timesheet recording his presence at work in Jacksonville, Florida. On that day, Lucas was granted a stay on his death sentence after it was discovered that details in his confession came from the case file which he had been given to read. The sentence was commuted to life imprisonment in 1998 by then Governor George W. Bush. On the 12th of March 2009, at 11 p.m, Lucas was found dead in prison from congestive heart failure at the age of 64. He is buried at Captain Joe Byrd Cemetery in Huntsville, Texas. Toole died of cirrhosis at the Florida State Prison on the 15th of September 1996 at the age of 49. His body went unclaimed, and he was buried in the Florida State Prison Cemetery. Lucas's credibility was damaged by his lack of precision. He initially admitted to having killed 60 people, a number he raised to over 100 victims, which police accepted, then a figure of 600 that led him to not being taken seriously. DNA evidence has verified that Lucas didn't kill his 20 supposed victims. Of more than 3,000 murder cases in which he was a suspect, police believed more than 200 cases were committed by him. However, he remained publicised as America's most prolific serial killer, despite denials such as stating, "I am not a serial killer." Some continue to believe, nonetheless, that Lucas was responsible for a massive number of killings. Criminologist Eric Hickey cites an unnamed investigator who interviewed Lucas several times and concluded that he had probably killed about 40 people. Such assertions were given little credence, with law enforcement involved refusing to corroborate these claims. An experienced Texas Ranger, to whom Ryan's team allowed access to Lucas, said that although it was obvious to him that Lucas often lied, there was an instance where he demonstrated guilty knowledge. Other Rangers had similar experiences with Lucas. In total, Lucas was convicted of 11 murders, the deaths of Viola Lucas, Becky Powell, and Kate Rich, as well as 26-year-old schoolteacher Linda Jane Phillips, who disappeared on the 8th of August 1970 in Richardson, Texas, a suburb of Dallas, whilst returning from a party to a parent's home in Kaufman County, Texas. A mutilated body was found on the 10th of August. She had sustained 26 stab wounds and had been sexually abused. Lucas confessed to the murder and claimed that he forced Phillips' car off the road at about 2:30 a.m. Lucas then allegedly forced her into his car at gunpoint, made her disrobe, then stabbed her in the throat, chest and stomach. The body of patrolman Clemmy Everett Curtis, 30, was found on the 3rd of August 1976, handcuffed near his patrol car in a wooded area just outside the Huntington, West Virginia city limit. He'd been shot through the chest once. Lucas confessed that he and Toole had killed Curtis. Lily Pearl Darty, 18, accepted a ride with Lucas on the 11th of November 1977 at a gas station in Harrison County and was later sexually assaulted and shot in the head. A decomposing body was found 3 weeks later in a wooded area north of Marshall, Texas. 23-year-old Deborah Louise Jackson, formerly known as Orange Socks, when unidentified, is believed to have been murdered on the 30th or 31st of October 1979 in Georgetown, Texas. Her body was found naked except for a pair of orange socks from which her nickname was derived. She had been strangled and was believed to have only died hours before the discovery. On the 26th of April 1981, Lucas allegedly broke into the apartment of 17-year-old babysitter Diana Lynn Bryant in Brownfield, Texas, with the intent of robbing it. He then took a knife, carried it to cut loose the cord on a vacuum cleaner and used it to strangle Bryant. Diana's father was satisfied with Lucas's confession and the case was closed. Glenna Faye Briggers, 65, was found by a neighbour on the 20th of December 1982 in Hale County, Texas. A butcher knife had been thrust into her stomach and a fork into her throat. According to Lucas, he broke into her home, killed her, then stole $180. Laura Marie Purchase, 26, was discovered on the 17th of March 1983, dead in a burning wooded area near League Line Road in Montgomery County, Texas. She had been reported missing from Houston on the 5th of March. An autopsy determined that she had been sexually assaulted and strangled. In 2008, DNA testing ruled Lucas out as a suspect in her case. In 2021, another man was charged with a murder. On the 16th of April 1983, 16-year-old Laura Jean Donnez skipped school in Houston but was never seen again. On the 18th of April 1989, an oilfield worker spotted a fire burning in a wooded area near Logging Road in Montgomery County, Texas. Donnez had been strangled, raped, beaten about the head, and her body burned after death. Lucas confessed to her murder and was able to lead police to where her body was discovered. Although almost all of Lucas's confessions have been discredited or entirely proven false, both he and Toole still remain credible suspects in the deaths of several women based on compelling circumstantial evidence. Cases in which they are both seen as viable suspects are as follows. On the 27th of June 1977, detectives responded to a wooded area off Old Union Church Road outside of Townsend, Delaware, after the remains of 50-year-old Marie Petrie Hazer were found in an open field. She had suffered blunt force trauma to her head and had fought back against her assailant. Lucas lived in Elkhorn, Maryland, at the time near where Hazer's remains were found. Investigators also found that writings Lucas made had many similarities to the crime scene. 45-year-old Stella Ellen McLean disappeared from a restaurant in Scottsbluff, Nebraska on the 7th of February 1978. On the 15th of April 1978, her headless body was discovered near Interstate 25 in Platte County, Wyoming. She had been raped and strangled. Her head was never recovered. In September 1984, Jim Larson, an investigator for the Scottsbluff County Sheriff's Department in Nebraska, questioned Lucas about Stella's murder. Larson asked deceptive questions to test Lucas, but apparently Lucas offered a compelling testimony to support his claims of killing McLean. 40-year-old Janet Lee Callies was last seen at the Sandbar, a bar near Interstate 80 in Grand Island, Nebraska on the 15th of November 1978. In 1984, Lucas confessed to a murder and stated that he and Toole had strangled Callies and buried her body. Lucas managed to recall personal details about Callies, such as how she had 3 children. 19-year-old Cheryl Ann Schreier was last seen working her shift at the Rhodes Road Pump Your Own Gas Station, self-service gas station in Scott City, Missouri on the 17th of April 1979 at 11:45 a.m. Toole and Lucas both admitted to authorities that they had killed and abducted a young woman nearby about the time Schreier vanished. She was the only girl reported missing in the region at the time, despite Lucas's claims to the contrary when police showed him a photo of her. Even though it was proved that Toole's niece and nephew, as well as Lucas and Toole, were present in Scott City, Missouri at the time of her disappearance, there was not enough evidence to bring charges against them. A highway worker discovered the body of an unidentified woman on the 29th of October 1981 in Iola, Texas. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. She was known as the Grimes County Jane Doe and was also wrapped in a plastic bag. Lucas confessed to a murder, stating that he drove the victim to the area from Durham, North Carolina, and claiming that her name might have been Cheryl. He then strangled her while Toole beat her in the head with a tire iron. He was able to lead police to the area in which her body had previously been found. The Hillside Strangler, the Hillside Stranglers, is the media epithet for one, later discovered to be 2, American serial killers who terrorized Los Angeles, California between October 1977 and February 1978, with the nicknames originating from the fact that many of the victims' bodies were discovered on the wooded hillsides surrounding the city. The perpetrators were eventually discovered to be cousins, Kenneth Bianchi and Angelo Buono Jr. All except one of the murders were committed in Buono's upholstery shop in Glendale, California. The victims, who ranged in age from 12 to 28, were raped, sodomized, beaten, and sometimes tortured before being strangled to death with a ligature. They were then cleaned and dumped naked across wooded hillsides in Los Angeles. Buono and Bianchi impersonated police officers to lure the victims from nearby locales, then drove them to Buono's upholstery shop to be sexually assaulted and killed. The Hillside Strangler murders began with the deaths of 2 prostitutes who were found strangled and dumped naked on hillsides northeast of Los Angeles in October and early November 1977. It was not until the deaths of 5 young women who were not prostitutes, but girls who had been abducted from middle-class neighborhoods, that the media attention and subsequent Hillside Strangler moniker came to prominence. The murders caused a moral panic, and young women grew increasingly terrified to go out after dark. There were 2 more deaths in December and February before the murders abruptly stopped. An extensive investigation proved fruitless until the arrest of Bianchi in January 1979 for the murder of 2 more young women in Washington and the subsequent linking of his past to the Strangler case. In order to avoid the death penalty, Bianchi implicated Buono as the other perpetrator of the Hillside Strangler killings and agreed to testify against him, leading to Buono's arrest in October 1979. In order to avoid the death penalty, Bianchi pleaded guilty to 5 of the murders in California, for which he was subsequently sentenced to life imprisonment, which he was to serve in Washington. Buono pleaded not guilty and was convicted of 9 of the Hillside Strangler murders in late 1983 before being sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. He then passed away in prison in September 2002 at the age of 67. Kenneth Bianchi was born on the 22nd of May 1951 in Rochester, New York, to a 17-year-old prostitute who gave him up for adoption just 2 weeks after he had been born. He was adopted in August 1951 by Nicholas Bianchi and his wife Frances Cioliano Bianchi, and was their only child. He was deeply troubled from a young age, with his adoptive mother describing him as a compulsive liar from the time he could talk. He would often fall into inattentive trance-like daydreams where his eyes would roll to the back of his head. From these symptoms, a physician diagnosed him with petit mal seizures at the age of 5. He was frequently given medical examinations by doctors due to problems with involuntary urination, which caused him to have a great deal of humiliation. He was prone to fits of anger as well as bouts of insomnia and habitual bedwetting when he was young. On the 2nd of January 1957, he accidentally fell off a jungle gym and landed on his face. His adoptive mother, in an attempt to change his behaviour, sent him to a private Catholic elementary school and to sessions with a psychiatrist, with Bianchi being diagnosed with a passive-aggressive personality disorder at just 10 years old. His IQ was measured at 116 at the age of 11, but despite having an above-average intelligence, he was an underachiever and was removed twice from schools after failing to get along with teachers. His adoptive mother described him as lazy, and his teachers claimed that he was working below his potential. In July 1963, he pulled down a 6-year-old's underwear after deciding that he liked doing it. After his adoptive father died suddenly from pneumonia in 1964, Bianchi, then a teen, refused to cry or show any other signs of grief. After her husband's death, Bianchi's adoptive mother had to work while he attended a public school and was known for keeping Bianchi home from school for long periods of time. Nonetheless, Bianchi dated frequently and even joined a motorcycle club. Shortly after he graduated from Gates Chili High School in 1970, he married his high school sweetheart, Brenda Beck. However, the marriage ended after 8 months. Supposedly, she left him without an explanation. As an adult, he decided that he wanted to become a police officer, and he enrolled at Monroe Community College to study police science and psychology. He dropped out of college after just 1 semester, however, and drifted through a series of menial jobs, finally finding employment as a security guard at a jewellery store. This then gave him the opportunity to steal valuables, which he often gave to girlfriends or prostitutes to buy their loyalty. He applied for a position at the local sheriff's department but was rejected. Because of his many petty thefts, he was constantly on the move. In 1976, he moved to Los Angeles, California, and started spending time with his older cousin and Francis's nephew, Angelo Buono Jr., who impressed Bianchi with his fancy clothes, jewellery, and a talent for getting any woman he wanted and putting them in their place. Before long, they worked together as pimps, and by late 1977 had escalated to committing what would later become known as the Hillside Strangler murders. Bianchi Buono had raped and murdered 10 young women and girls by the time they were arrested in early 1979. Angelo Anthony Buono Jr. was born on the 5th of October 1934 in Rochester, New York. He moved to Glendale, California at 5 years old. As a teenager, he began blaming his mother for his parents' divorce and calling her demeaning names such as a whore and idolised rapist Carol Chessman. He also boasted to his friends about raping and sodomizing girls. He dropped out of school at 16. In 1951, he was sent to a reformatory school, but escaped shortly afterwards with several other youths. Throughout his adult life, he had fathered 8 children and got married 4 times, including 1 in prison, though during the murders he was unmarried. He also piled up an extensive criminal record ranging from grand theft auto, rape, pimping, and failure to pay child support. On the 10th of January 1956, 17-year-old Geraldine Vinyl, Buono's first wife, gave birth to his first son, Michael Lee Buono. He divorced her shortly afterwards and refused to pay child support. On the 15th of April 1957, Buono married his second wife, Mary Catherine Candy Castillo, aged 17, with whom Buono had 5 children. One night in late 1963, Buono dragged Candy by the hair into the living room, tossed her on the floor and assaulted her in full view of their children because she had rejected his advances. In May 1964, Candy rightfully filed for divorce, citing Buono's aggressive and perversive sexual desires and his unpredictable violence. A year later, Buono moved in with 25-year-old Nanette Campina, a single mother of 2. He was said to have treated her similarly to how he had treated Candy, physically and sexually abusing her, to the point where she was afraid to leave him because she thought he might kill her. He had 2 children with her, born in 1967 and 1969. Shortly before the birth of Buono's first child with Campina, he was given a 1-year suspended sentence for stealing a cat. In 1971, Buono began sexually abusing his 14-year-old stepdaughter, which caused Campina to leave him, taking the children with her. In 1972, Buono married Deborah Taylor, his 3rd wife, and moved in with a male roommate shortly afterwards. Buono never moved in with Taylor and didn't bother getting a divorce. On one occasion, his roommate witnessed Buono watching school children through binoculars whilst masturbating. In May 1975, Buono, aged 40, moved into his own place and opened his own upholstery shop at 703 East Colorado Street in northeast Glendale. He reportedly revelled in the fact that he was Italian and hung up the Italian flag on the top of his shop. He began calling himself the Italian Stallion and earned a reputation for being a stud, despite having multiple ex-wives. Having multiple young girlfriends at once, some as young as 13, impressing the girls with fancy clothing and expensive jewellery such as a gold chain and a large turquoise ring. In July 1975, Buono began dating a teenage girl who he impregnated twice. He forced her to abort the first child, and the second pregnancy ended in a miscarriage. While the girl stayed loyal to him, he frequently had sexual relations with other young women. In January 1976, his adoptive cousin, 24-year-old Kenneth Bianchi, moved in with him. Bianchi was a criminal himself, having been arrested numerous times, mostly for petty theft. When Bianchi arrived to his cousin's home, he discovered that Buono had been holding 4 teenage girls in his home virtually as prisoners, a sight which Bianchi described as junior harem. Bianchi later told that 2 of Buono's sons, Peter and Danny, often brought their own girlfriends to their father's place to be used for sex. In August 1976, about 7 months after his cousin had moved in, Buono practically threw Bianchi out of the house after growing tired of having him at his house so often. In June 1977, Bianchi met 16-year-old Sabra Hanan from Phoenix, Arizona, and brought her to Buono's residence under a false pretense of nude photography in exchange for money, as the girl had run out of cash. One night, Buono and Bianchi stripped her, beat her with a wet towel, and raped her. She was held as a prisoner for the following 3 months. She endured harsh beatings from the pair and was forced to turn tricks for customers at Buono's upholstery shop, which he used to bolster the business. She was sometimes starved for days at a time. In early September, she escaped her captivity by running away during an outside job. In the fall of 1977, Buono and Bianchi began discussing the idea of pimping young women as a way to make money. The idea was initially proposed by Buono as they were short on cash. By this point, according to Bianchi, he and Buono had already started talking about the possibility of killing someone. On the 16th of October 1977, Buono and Bianchi paid 2 sex workers, 18-year-old Deborah Noble and 19-year-old Yolanda Washington, who were also part-time waitresses, $175 for a list of their clients known as a trick list in slang. The latter told Buono that she frequented a street on Sunset Boulevard. Shortly afterwards, the two found out the list was fake, and infuriated, they pursued Noble and Washington to get revenge for the money they'd paid. On the 17th of October evening, Buono and Bianchi raped Washington at the back of Bianchi's car before strangling her to death. Soon afterwards, the pair embarked on a 5-month killing spree, in which left 9 more young women and girls dead, strangled with a garrote and then dumped naked on wooded hillsides across Los Angeles. Yolanda Washington was a 19-year-old prostitute and part-time waitress. She always worked on a certain stretch of Sunset Boulevard. Her naked body was found on the 18th of October 1977 on a hillside near Ventura Freeway. Detectives determined that her body was clean before being dumped, while faint marks were also visible around the neck, wrists and ankles, signs of a rope being used. She had been assaulted, raped and strangled. According to Bianchi, they picked her up from her street corner on the 17th of October evening in Bianchi's Cadillac. Buono, who was in the driver's seat, flashed his badge and handcuffed her, after which Bianchi stripped her, raped her and strangled her to death after a brief struggle. On the 1st of November 1977, police were called to Alta Terrace Drive in La Crescenta, a neighbourhood 12 miles north of downtown LA, where the body of a teenage girl was found naked, face up on a parkway in a middle-class residential area. The homeowner had covered her with tarp in the early morning hours to prevent the neighbourhood children from seeing her on their way to school. Ligature marks were found on her neck, wrists and ankles, indicating to police that she had been bound and strangled. Her body had been dumped, indicating that she was killed elsewhere. Detective Salerno found small pieces of light-coloured fluff on her eyelid and saved it for forensic experts. The girl, who had been described as being small and thin, weighing about 90 pounds and appearing to be about 16 years old, was eventually identified as 15-year-old Judith Lynn Miller, a former student of Hollywood High School. After dropping out, Miller was a runaway and a small-time sex worker. She was last seen alive on Halloween 1977, talking to a man driving a large 2-tone sedan on Sunset Boulevard next to Carney's. The stranglers had told her that they were undercover police officers, handcuffed her and took her to Buono's auto upholstery shop at 703 East Colorado Street in Glendale, where she was murdered. Only 5 days later, on the 6th of November 1977, the nude body of another woman was discovered near the Chevy Chase Country Club in Glendale. Like Miller, her body bore 5-point, neck, wrists and ankles ligature marks and showed signs of having been strangled, brutally raped but not sodomized. The woman was later identified as 21-year-old waitress Elisa Teresa Lisa Crustin, who was last seen leaving the restaurant where she worked the night before her body was discovered. In addition to working full-time, Chastain also was a professional dancer in the all-female dance and cabaret troupe, the LA Knockers, and, unlike the previous two victims, was not a prostitute, drug user, or runaway. The stranglers followed her after she'd been seen driving home from work, pulled her over on the street she lived on, presented a fake police badge, and told her that they were detectives. They then handcuffed her and told her that they needed to take her in for questioning. At some point in early November 1977, two men approached 24-year-old Catherine Law Baker, the daughter of actor Peter Law, famous for his role as a serial killer in Fritz Lang's film M, with the intent of abducting and killing her. However, when Law produced not only her driver's license when requested, but also a picture of her sitting on her father's lap as a child, the two let her go without incident, fearing the murder of a celebrity's child would attract an unusually high amount of police and press attention. Law didn't realise who the men were until they were arrested, at which point she recalled that two men flashing LA police badges had approached her in the past. On Sunday the 13th November 1977, two girls, 12-year-old Dolores Ann Dolly Capida and 14-year-old Sonja Marie Johnson, boarded an RTD bus from the front of Eagle Rock Plaza on Colorado Boulevard and headed home. The last time they were seen getting off the bus at York Boulevard and North Avenue 46 and approaching a two-tone sedan that reportedly had two men inside. They were discovered by a 9-year-old boy who was treasure hunting in a trash heap on the hillside near Dodger Stadium on the 20th of November 1977. Earlier that same day, on the 20th of November 1977, hitchhikers found the naked body of 20-year-old Christina Reckler, a quiet, unassuming honor student at the Art Center College of Design, described by Detective Bob Grogan of the Los Angeles Police Department as a loving and serious young woman who should have had a bright future ahead of her. Reckler was discovered on a hillside between Glendale and Eagle Rock. When found by Detective Grogan, the typical ligature marks were on her wrists, ankles and neck, and when he turned her over, bruises were observed on her. Unlike the first three victims, there was 2 puncture marks on her arm, but no signs of needle tracks that indicated her being a drug addict. It was later determined that she had been injected with Windex, a common ammonia-based window, glass, and hard surface cleaner. On the 23rd of November 1977, the badly decomposed body of 28-year-old Evelyn Jane King, an aspiring actress who had gone missing on the 9th of November, was discovered in the bushes near the Los Feliz Boulevard off-ramp of the Golden State Freeway. The severity of decomposition prevented determination as to whether she'd been raped or tortured, but she'd been strangled like the others. In response, authorities created a task force, initially composed of 30 officers from the LAPD, the Sheriff's Department, and the Glendale Police Department to catch the predator, now dubbed the Hillside Strangler. On the 29th of November 1977, police found the body of 18-year-old Lauren Ray Wagner, a business student who lived with her parents in the San Fernando Valley in hills around Los Angeles, Mount Washington. She had ligature marks on her neck, ankles, and wrists. There were also burn marks on her hands, indicating that she was tortured. Her parents had expected her to come home before midnight, and the next morning, when they found her car parked across the street with the door ajar, her father questioned the neighbours. He found the woman who lived at the house where Lauren's car had been parked saw her abduction. The woman stated that she saw 2 men, one tall and young, the other who was older and shorter with bushy hair. She also stated that she heard Wagner cry out, "You won't get away with this," during her abduction. On the 14th of December 1977, the naked body of 17-year-old prostitute Kimberly Diane Martin, which also showed signs of torture, was found on a deserted lot near Los Angeles City Hall. She'd previously joined a call girl agency because she feared exposing herself on the streets with the strangler on the loose. The killers happened to place a call to her agency from the Hollywood Public Library payphone, and she was by chance the call girl who was dispatched. When the police investigated the apartment she'd been dispatched to, they found it vacant and broken into. The body of the final Hillside Strangler victim was discovered in Los Angeles on the 17th of February 1978, when a helicopter pilot spotted an orange Datsun abandoned midway down a cliff on the Angeles Crest Highway. Police responded to the scene and discovered the new body of the car's owner, 20-year-old Cindy Lee Husbeth, a student and part-time waitress, in the trunk. Her corpse again showed ligature marks, and that she'd been raped and tortured. She had been strangled and her body placed in the trunk of the car, which was then pushed off the cliff. Hudspeth's murder had initially been unplanned. Bianchi had arrived at Buono's upholstery shop at closing time on the 16th of February to discover Hudspeth in the company of Buono, discussing upholstery work she wished to perform on her car. The 2 men had a private discussion, opting to make her their next victim. On the 19th of January 1979, after an intense investigation, police charged Bianchi and Buono with crimes. Bianchi had fled to Bellingham, Washington, where he was soon arrested by Bellingham Police Department for raping and murdering 2 women he had lured to a home for a house-sitting job. Bianchi attempted to set up an insanity defense, claiming that he had dissociative identity disorder and that a personality separate from himself committed the murders. Court psychologist, notably Dr. Martin Orne, observed Bianchi and found that he was faking, so Bianchi agreed to plead guilty and testified against Buono in exchange for leniency. At the conclusion of Buono's trial in 1983, presiding judge Ronald M. George, who later became Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court, stated during sentencing, at his trial, Bianchi pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, claiming that another personality, one Steve Walker, had committed the crimes. It is believed that he had recently seen the film Sybil 1976, about a woman suffering from multiple personalities triggered by childhood abuse. Bianchi convinced a few expert psychiatrists that he indeed suffered from multiple personality disorder, but investigators brought their own psychiatrists, mainly Martin Orne. When Orne mentioned to Bianchi that in genuine cases of the disorder, there tend to be 3 or more personalities, to which Bianchi promptly created another alias, Billy. To prove that Bianchi had lied about having multiple personalities to avoid being prosecuted, Orne tested him by introducing him to his lawyer, who wasn't present. Bianchi interacted with the imaginary lawyer. Orne then brought in his real lawyer, flustering Bianchi, who claimed that the imaginary lawyer had vanished. Prior to his actual lawyer's appearance, Bianchi even leaned over to shake the hand of the imaginary one, an action which is referred to as tactile hallucinations that experts explain. Orne had never seen a true tactile hallucination in his career, suggesting that this was a complete fabrication. Bianchi eventually pleaded guilty in order to avoid the death penalty in Washington state. Investigators eventually discovered that the name Stephen Walker came from a student whose identity Bianchi had previously attempted to steal for the purpose of fraudulently practicing psychology. Police also found a small library of books in Bianchi's home on topics of modern psychology, further suggestion of his ability to fake multiple personality disorder. Once his claims were subjected to scrutiny, Bianchi eventually admitted that he'd been faking the disorder. He was eventually diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder with sexual sadism disorder. In an attempt to obtain a reduced sentence, Bianchi agreed to testify against Buono. However, in giving his testimony, he made every effort to be as uncooperative and self-contradictory as possible, apparently hoping to avert Buono's conviction. In the end, Bianchi's efforts were unsuccessful, as Buono was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. Bianchi himself was also ultimately sentenced to 2 terms of life imprisonment with the possibility of parole. In 1980, Bianchi began a relationship with Veronica Compton, a woman whom he had met in prison. During his trial, she testified for the defense, telling the jury a false, fake tale about the crimes in an attempt to exculpate Bianchi. She also admitted to wanting to buy a mortuary with another convicted murderer for the purpose of necrophilia. She was later convicted and imprisoned for attempting to strangle a woman she lured to a motel in an attempt to convince authorities that the Hillside Strangler was still on the loose. While incarcerated, Bianchi had smuggled a semen-filled condom to her inside the spine of a book so she could use it to stage a rape murder committed by the Hillside Strangler. However, she was released in 2003. In 1992, Bianchi sued Catherine Uronwode for $8.5 million for having an image of his face depicted on a trading card he claimed his face was trademarked. The judge dismissed the case after ruling that if Bianchi had been using his face as a trademark when he was killing women, he wouldn't have tried to hide it from police. In January 1979, Bianchi was arrested in connection with the murders of 2 women in Bellingham, Washington. After pleading guilty, Bianchi was quickly linked to the Hillside Strangler murders in California. In order to avoid the death penalty, Bianchi named Buono as the other perpetrator in the Hillside Strangler case and agreed to testify against him. On the 22nd of October 1979, Buono was arrested at his upholstery shop in Glendale and charged with 24 felonies, including murder, sodomy, and rape. Upon his arrival at the Los Angeles County Jail, Buono was assigned to High Power, a super security section designed for prisoners who were at high risk from other inmates, primarily informers or rapists, whose victims were young. One day, an inmate asked Buono why he killed all those girls, to which he reportedly replied, The preliminary hearing on Buono lasted for 10 months. The legal case against Buono was based largely upon Bianchi's testimony. After Bianchi made repeated self-contradictory statements in order to diminish his own credibility as a witness to have the case against Buono dismissed, the case's original prosecutors from District Attorney John Vanderkamp's office moved to dismiss all charges against Buono and set him free. On the 21st of July 1981, the presiding judge, Ronald M. George, refused to release Buono, believing that there was sufficient probable cause to believe that Buono had committed murder, and reassigned the case to the California Attorney General George Duncans' office. Buono's trial would become the longest in American legal history, lasting from November 1981 until November 1983, with nearly 400 witnesses testifying. Jury selection for Buono's trial was completed in the spring of 1982. In June 1982, Bianchi took the stand and, once again, purposefully made contradictory statements. In fact, one of the prosecutors warned the jury to expect some lies during Bianchi's testimony. The prosecutors played Bianchi's taped confession to the jury. Throughout the trial, the jurors were taken on a series of excursions to the sites where the victims were abducted or dumped, including the exact spot where the bodies of Sonja Johnson and Dolores Capida were discovered. The jury was also shown the graphic photos of the murdered women's corpses. During the trial, the defense attorneys called 10 character witnesses for Buono, including his older sister, who testified that Buono was a non-violent person who cared for his cancer-stricken mother the same year that the killings had occurred. The prosecution, in turn, called on one of Buono's childhood friends who testified that Buono talked about rape all the time. The jury returned 10 verdicts from the 30th of November to the 14th of November 1983, convicted Buono of 9 counts of murder. He was found not guilty in the murder of Yolanda Washington. On the 16th of November, Buono took the stand for the first time. When asked what the appropriate punishment for him would be, he replied, "My morals and constitutional rights have been broken. I ain't taking any procedure in this trial." The prosecutors called for the death penalty, describing Buono and Bianchi's acts as worse than animals. After 1 hour of deliberation, on the 4th of January 1984, Buono was sentenced to life imprisonment. Judge George concluded the 2-year-long trial by commenting that the death sentence was the appropriate punishment for both Buono and Bianchi, adding that the two should never see the outside of a jail cell again. Bianchi is currently serving his sentence at Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla, Washington. He was denied parole on the 18th of August 2010 by a state board in Sacramento. Bianchi was most recently denied parole in July 2025. Shortly after his sentencing, Buono was initially sent to Folsom State Prison, where he refused to come out of his cell due to fear of injury by other inmates, before being transferred. In 1986, Buono married, for the 4th time, Christine Kazuska, a mother of 3 and supervisor at the California State Employment Development Department. He died of a heart attack on the 21st of September 2002 in his jail cell whilst incarcerated at Calipatria State Prison. His body was cremated. In 2007, his grandson, Christopher Buono, committed suicide shortly after shooting his grandmother, Mary Castillo, in the head. Castillo was at one time married to Buono, had 5 children with him, including Chris's father. Chris Buono was unaware of his grandfather's true identity until 2005. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts and opinions about this case in the comments below. And also let me know if there's any true crime cases that you would like to see me cover on this channel. And I will be back next Friday with another true crime video. Thanks for watching.